It was like and how it felt to be a baseball player at the turn of the century and in the decades shortly thereafter. This is also the story of America at the turn of the century and prior to World War I, a time of cobblestone streets and horse-drawn trolleys. It is the story of young man's hopes, his struggles, his triumphs and his failures in what history has recorded as the quiet time. It is about the time when the fate of young men was seen as their own doing, and hard work was viewed as the pathway to success. It is about the time of carriages and hansom cabs, and the time when some men looked to the sky. It is about the time in baseball when Ty Cobb would win 12 batting championships in 13 years and had a .371 average in the one year he didn't win. It is about the time when home run champions could win the title with 6 or 10 or 19. It is about the time of John McGraw, Iron Man McGinty, and Christy Mathewson. The time of Walter Johnson, of Rube Marquardt, Tommy Leach, and Honus Wagner. All these were honored in their generation and were the glory of their times.
Hey, what's going on, sports cards fans? Ray from Philly here. It is Tuesday, November 21st. It's the week of Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there. I'm doing a book review. I haven't done a baseball book review since March of this year, and the last book review I did was on Grover Cleveland Alexander, called The Best Team Over There. Well, this is my 11th book that I've read now since I started this in 2021. So I got into, I'm a baseball history nut, and I watch a lot of documentaries and baseball movies and read baseball books. So with this book, it's called The Glory of Their Times, the story of the early days of baseball told by the men who played it, written by Lawrence Ritter. And it is a classic book. If you're a baseball historian and you love to read about the history of baseball, this is definitely it. The publisher is Macmillan. There is 291 pages in this book. It's a very easy read, and it's stories based on players at the turn of the century. And you can actually listen to this book, an audio book, and actually hear the players' interviews that are being interviewed in this book. You hear their voices, which I've heard the audiobook a couple times. It's great. Lawrence Ritter did this book in 1966, so he interviewed all these players, I think around 65. So this is a good 30, 40, 50 years after these guys retired in 1965. So that means these players played, some of them in the late 1890s, early 1900s, so it's a lot of dead ball era. So if you're interested in learning about dead ball era players, this is definitely the book. I'm going to flip the phone around and show you all the books that I've read so far in the past 2 years and show some of the cool pictures and some of the players that are being interviewed in this book. But I definitely give it a 2 thumbs up. Without a doubt, in my opinion, it's the best baseball book I've ever read. A lot of people consider this the Bible of baseball books, is The Glory of Their Times. This and Ball 4 by Jim Bouton. But this definitely takes the cake. If you want a good book from the early days, from 100 years ago, of Fred Snodgrass and Paul Wainer and those players, this is definitely the book to get. So I'm going to flip the phone around, show you the pictures in here and the names of the players that are being interviewed, and just hold on. All right, and we're back. So want to go over the books. Since this is episode number 11, I've read 10 other books before that. This isn't really in any order, but I started reading these books. It would probably be starting with Dick Allen, The Life and Times of a Baseball Mortal, written by Bill Cashadis. Then I read Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty. Before I read The Glory of Their Times, Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty by Charles Learson was my favorite baseball book of all time. In that book, Charles Learson really gets to the nitty-gritty of Ty Cobb. If you guys know anything about the history of Ty Cobb, Al Stump really did him no good in the early 60s after Ty Cobb passed away. Al Stump really made Ty Cobb look bad, and even in the movie that came out with Tommy Lee Jones playing Ty Cobb, Al Stump really did Ty Cobb no good service whatsoever. But Charles Learson gets to the root of it and basically portrays Ty Cobb as nowhere near the bad person that Al Stump portrayed him to be. The next book I read was 24 Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid, written by John Shea. Then I read Satchel by Larry Tye, the Cooperstown Case book written by Jay Jaffe. Yogi, A Life Behind the Mask, written by John Passat. Baseball Gods and Scandal, written by Ian Kahanowitz. That's a great book. Tom Seaver, written by Bill Madden. Sandy Koufax by Jane Levy. And the last book review I did was The Best Team Over There, about Grover Cleveland Alexander, written by Jim Leake. So now we're here on The Glory of Their Times. And like I said, here's all the players that they're interviewing. And you can actually hear these players on the audio book version of this. So Rube Marquardt, Tommy Leach, Davy Jones, Sam Crawford, Jimmy Austin, Fred Snodgrass, Stanley Kovaleski, Al Bridwell, Harry Hooper, Joe Wood, Chief Myers, Hans Lobert, Rube Bressler, Ed Roush, Bill Wamskins, Sam Jones, Bob O'Farrell, Lefty O'Doul, Goose Goslin, Willie Cam, Heine Groh, and Paul Wainer. What I really like, and the pictures in here are just great. Here's Fred Snodgrass. There's Harry Hooper slides into third. Is he safe or out? The Philadelphia third baseman is Home Run Baker. And now he slides home. Is he safe or out this time? Jim Thorpe. He's not being interviewed in here, but it's just a cool picture. Here's William C. Roush, Ed's father, as a semi-pro ball player in the 1880s. On and on and on. I mean, here's Frank Chance, peerless leader. Lefty O'Doul. This was a great chapter on Lefty O'Doul. What's really interesting, some more good pictures of Smokey Joe Wood. What's really cool is, you know how today, guys my age, guys over 50 will talk about players today and say, oh, they're nowhere near as good as the players when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s. And then when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, I would hear the adults older than me saying, oh, the players weren't nowhere good as the players when I was a kid in the 40s and 50s. And same thing here. When I'm reading these books, I'm listening to the stories of like Rube Waddell and Paul Wainer and Rube Marquardt, and Tommy Leach and Sam Crawford and Joe Wood and listening to the stories. And remember, these guys played in like from 1890 to, it covers, the time it covers is about from 1890 to 1929, 1930. So it's interesting to hear some of these guys on the in the chapters in here and in the audio version talk about the players that were current at that time, which this book came out in 1965, 66. Talk about players like Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle, saying, those guys were nowhere near as good as, Trish Speaker and Ty Cobb and Rogers Hornsby and Paul Wainer. It's amazing how the same thing that I do today and how my father and grandfather did and so on and so forth before that. It's amazing how we look at guys like Willie Mays and Mantle and Schmidt and Yount and Brett and all those guys as great players. And yet when you're reading the stories from these guys, they're talking about the players that were current at the time in the 60s, like a Mantle, like a Mays, like an Aaron. And they just didn't seem like they felt like they were anywhere near as good. Plus, the stories that you're hearing in this book is a different game. It's a lot of small ball. It's about getting them over and getting them in. A lot of stealing bases, hit and run, hit them where they ain't. That's pretty much the story in here. And stories about baseball was their life. These players would live on trains, go from town to town. They were getting discovered while they were in high school, playing in sandlots or playing in independent leagues. And here's a picture of Tommy Leach in 1902. And, you know, baseball then, you didn't get paid that much. So if a player told their mother or father they were going to get on a train and go become a professional ball player, it was like taboo. It was like you didn't want to tell your parents that. And the parents basically would say, okay, we'll let you give it a shot, but promise that if you do fail and you come back, you'll continue to go on with your college education. Here's Ed Delahanty, the pride of the Phillies and of Cleveland. So it's a totally different game, the dead ball era in the late 20th century, late 19th century, 1890s, and early 20th century, like from 1900 to 1930. Totally different philosophy, mentality. Baseball was life for these players. Not that it wasn't life for the guys in the 50s and 60s and current, but it really was their life. It's guys that played and worked in coal mines and fields and factories and getting on trains and driving to town to play professional baseball. You know, there was no planes back then, so it was a much different life. But definitely I give this a 2 thumbs up. Ty Cobb was the best book, A Terrible Beauty, that I ever read until this one. The Glory of Their Times by Lawrence Ritter. I highly, highly, highly recommend. I can't believe it took me this long to read this book. This is the baseball Bible, considered by a lot of baseball book people. So there you have it. The Glory of Their Times. Definitely check it out. All right, so I appreciate you guys watching. I will be back tomorrow night doing another episode of The Call to the Hall, featuring players who I feel should deserve to get in the Hall of Fame, or maybe will get in the Hall of Fame someday, on rookie cards of baseball players that I featured. I think tomorrow will be episode number 22, so stay tuned for that. All right, so like I always say, have fun with it. Stay tuned for more, and like I always say, take care, guys. Have fun with it. See you. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.